I'm going to switch over to the ident.
So welcome back, everybody. This is episode 5 of Boogie Nights, and we're back with Evil Antonio, and this time we're talking about science fiction films. We're going to go into a wide variety of topics, I'm sure, but we'll try to focus ourselves mostly on the societal impact that science fiction films over the decades had, and also the connection to humanity and how humans interact with technology, whether it's in a science fiction film or in real life. So, Evil, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Very nice to see you again, Danny.
Yeah. So last time, I'm just gonna like recap a little bit. Last time we went into a hour-and-a-half long rant about crime films, which kind of spiraled out of control. It kind of spiraled out of control a little bit. So we had lots of topics to follow up on, and one of them was science fiction, as also requested by a commenter on YouTube. So I guess that's this one then.
Yep.
I just wanted to quickly ask you, and I told you this before, but the film for you that is most in your mind when you first started becoming aware that what is presented in a science fiction film could one day be a reality, do you have any film in mind that was for you the one that sort of unlocked that in your mind?
That science fiction could become a reality? Or like what really got me into science fiction?
Well, I mean, I guess both, but like for me, there was a clear film that said like, oh, this could one day be real. Like it's a concept in a film now, but one day maybe it'll be real.
Well, there was one that that really got me into sci-fi, but when you look at the practicalities of the sci-fi they're doing, it would not be possible to do what they did, and that's Fantastic Voyage.
Okay.
Because if you've been a kid in any of like the past 30, 40 years, I guarantee you that at least one of your favorite cartoon shows has done the plot to Fantastic Voyage.
Right.
Been copied that much. And so when you go back and you see the original and you're like, wow, a lot of people really like this movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like that, or seeing like Soylent Green for the first time.
Right.
Seeing it, it's become such an ingrained part of our psyche. And then you go back and you see where that all came from, and you're like, oh, it just started from this one thing.
Right.
That I would say those two are real good examples of that.
Now, is there a way to quickly recap this plot for Fantastic Voyage without giving too much away?
Sure. No, well, there's a twist at the end, but it's very easy to avoid that twist because you only need to know the basic plot, and then you'll go, oh yeah, the president has a brain aneurysm, and they have a submarine and a shrink ray, and so they have to shrink the submarine, inject it inside of him, and then swim up and like shoot the brain aneurysm out of his head so it doesn't blow up.
Right.
I think it might have actually been some kind of bomber or like weird thing where it was like a terrorist type thing in the movie, but that's the basic plot. And so you can probably name 3 or 4 shows off the top of your head that did that.
Right.
Like, you know, Invader Zim, Jimmy Neutron.
The Magic School Bus if you're a bit older.
Yeah, I think Fairly Odd Parents have done it at one point. I mean, pretty much every show, every cartoon show has done that plot at one point or another.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and as I sort of like explained to you in length, for me, it was Cherry 2000, which is kind of an obscure little sci-fi film about human analog robots and the relationship between them. And it is basically about somebody's love robot breaking down, and he is to a certain extent so much in love with it that he goes on this hero's journey to, you know, try to rekindle that. And that was for me the first time where I really started thinking like, oh, this somehow this makes a connection with me and it looks real. And it seems to be something in the people's mindset that they want to recreate reality artificially, but to their own sort of specifications, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, I mean, that kind of an eternal conundrum that you see people, that you see characters struggling with throughout the entire course of fiction and history. The ability to change your destiny, or recreate specific parts of the past, or bring back lost loved ones or something like that. Any one of those desires are all kind of covered in the idea of artificial intelligence and virtual reality and things along those lines, where you can manipulate what you want to your, it's the whole Frankenstein syndrome, the ability to want to have complete control over the one thing in life you can't seem to get control of.
Right. So yeah, and I think like one of your big interests seems to be the way it reflects the society's zeitgeist of that time, and I really think around that time it was really becoming clear that people saw that potential to control what they create, basically.
When was Cherry 2000? It was in the 80s, I believe.
It very much feels and looks like an 80s film, and I'll look it up real quick now.
Oh, I have them all here.
You're better
Except
prepared.
2000, of course.
87. It was
87.
Yeah.
And where were the Mad Max films coming out around?
It feels very much the same. At least the first one. Maybe the second one was more 90s, but.
Well, Mad Max, the first one was 79.
There you go.
And I believe there was like a few years difference between all of them. So, but yeah, I think you had a lot of exploitation films coming out around that time as well. And those usually had that dystopian kind of wasteland desert type look.
Yeah.
That goes with resources being used up. And wasn't there the big greenhouse gas scare in the 80s, or was that the 70s?
There was actually.
Fixing their refrigerators and everything.
Yeah, and it was about like spray can. I remember that.
Aerosol, yeah.
Aerosol, and I was in elementary school, so it was late 80s, early 90s, that we were no longer allowed to use hairspray and stuff,
Yeah, and so you can see right there the two big ideas of a lot of the films of that generation. You had the increased computers were making more and more strides. Right at 91, I think it was like very early 90s. You had the internet get created.
Yep.
So you had that kind of the fear of our impact on the Earth, combined with the growing potential of this new medium.
Yeah.
And then I think if you go back to like the late 60s and the 70s, you can see a pattern there to go with kind of the bleak view humans had of society in general at that time, that things weren't going to be getting better, because that's when you had a lot of famous dystopian films come out. Planet of the Apes, Soylent Green, Silent Running, Logan's Run.
Yeah, Logan's Run is an interesting one because I sometimes get confused because I once read a book and I somehow believe it was by Stephen King that was the exact plot to Logan's Run, only a lot more gory.
Could be.
But yeah, I've never been able to find that connection again. So if anybody knows about this, please shout out, because I read that entire book and I was really involved with it. And then I saw Logan's Run and I was like, yeah. I really like that look, though, of the older sci-fi where it wasn't all, well, I mean, at the risk of sounding cliche, but like, the CGI thing.
Oh, yeah. No, I love the sci-fi in general from the 70s and the 60s. It had a great look to it. I mean, for one, you had both of Kubrick's sci-fi epics.
Yep.
You had 2001 in 68, and you had A Clockwork Orange in 71. You had THX 138 in 71.
A beautiful film.
Yeah, very good. You also had a lot of the really kind of weird, bubbly sci-fi that doesn't exist anymore, that was kind of like a fusion of the sci-fi and the hippie mentality, and so that would be films like Barbarella,
Right.
um, Zardoz in '74, even though not a lot of people like that one. And I'd say
I
to a
was
lesser
actually
extent, Logan's Run and Fantastic Voyage.
I was looking through Zardos as I was preparing the show, and to be honest with you, it looked like Sean Connery was just sort of shot for a 70s, vintage porn scene or something. It looked like kind of Caligula orgies with Sean Connery at the center of it.
Not quite, especially when he gets to the land of the immortals, because
Right.
the immortals don't even know how to have sex anymore.
Oh, okay.
In one very famous awkward scene where he has to diagram where they're showing him what the penis is and what they think it was used for. I mean, it's a weird movie. A lot of people, it still goes down as a major flop, but I have a special liking for it. I like the plot idea of it because it's basically a man being like teleported up to the land of the gods,
Right.
and spoiler alert, eventually killing the gods after finding out they're not as godly as you may think they are. And then also there's this element in the film that I think is very reminiscent of the internet today. It was these crystals that they had.
Right.
And I believe he wore them on like the wrist or his belt, and they acted almost like cell phones. You could communicate with anybody else that had a crystal. You could point it at objects, and it would tell you what the object was and give you all the information on it. It was this. All of the crystals were all interconnected, and there was this giant crystal that he had to destroy at the end of the movie to break all of them, kind of like a server.
Right.
It's like you watch it and it's goofy as fuck, and it's not the standard kind of sci-fi where everything's metal and you're in, he did a very kind of weird hippie-ish kind of thing that you could see, very
Right.
similar to Barbarella. And
Right.
so I think a lot of people write it off, but those crystals, that's a dead ringer for the internet, like 30 years before it happened.
Well,
And occasionally you'll see like sci-fi films that do that, where they'll catch something and they'll still go under the radar. Another one, a great example of that would be Death Watch from 1980, where Harvey
Right.
Keitel has a camera installed into his eye, and he's hired as a cameraman by this reality TV show to follow a woman that's terminally ill. And the point of the reality TV show is you're going to watch her die
Right.
on, and it kind of predicts and talks about a lot of the issues of reality TV that would come up later on in the 2000s, or well, not that, like the 90s with Survivor and all that. My mistake.
Right. So it's like sort of that precursor to the reality TV show, and
Yeah.
that kind of shows that there's always been a human need to be that voyeuristic on other people's lives.
Yeah, I would definitely say that. And there's a lot of there's been, you can almost say there's a voyeurism outside of porn. There's a voyeurism genre within like proper cinema about films that deal explicitly with that idea of voyeurism and being watched and observed. There's Peeping Tom,
Mm-hmm.
which many regard as like one of the early prototype slashers.
Mm-hmm.
They bring that up in Psycho when they talk about like the ancestors of slashers, and then it goes from there to Halloween.
Right.
And stuff like Death Watch, and there's a whole bunch of other ones as well that just kind of deal with that idea of being watched.
So comparing that to sort of the earlier days of sci-fi, we were talking about that a little bit before, but how that sort of that change again in the earlier days, you were saying things were kind of a bit more fluffy and well, I guess what I want to do really is that journey through we talked about earlier from where sci-fi was an epic location set to where it's now more like an epic idea.
Oh yeah, totally. Well, like I was kind of saying and building up to before, I think each decade of sci-fi kind of reflects a lot of societal things going on. A lot of sci-fi writers will say that when you're writing sci-fi, you're really writing about today. You're just kind of cloaking it in one layer of distance. And so, like with the 50s and the 40s and stuff like that, we pair that all the time nowadays about being the time where everyone was optimistic about the future because there was so much potential and everything was bright and shiny. And then as we get into the 60s and the 70s, you see the dissolution of that idea, where they start peeling away those false coats, and you start getting into a more dystopian view of the future, which kind of correlates to a lot of stuff that's going on at that time, civil rights, Vietnam War, a lot of things that show America isn't this bright and shining thing. And then also into the 70s, things like stagflation, where the economy starts to lag and people just don't feel that kind of booming sense that was back in the 50s, where everybody was getting an education and getting a house. And that's where you get a lot of the really classic dystopian sci-fi films were made around that time. Like I said, both Stanley Kubrick's Planet of the Apes was a 68, Soylent Green was a 73, Logan's Run 76, Man Who Fell to Earth, if you want to get a little bit weirder with it, 76. You know, and then with the 70s and 80s, I mean with the 80s and the 90s, it gets a little bit trickier because ideas start going out all over the place. Although we discussed the 80s and 90s a bit at the top, and what I think is interesting is where we're at now in sci-fi. The ideas are becoming a lot more specific. Like as we're getting to the point where some of these technological notions of like AI and how we could do certain things, when they're starting to look closer and closer to reality, I feel that the questions we're grappling with in sci-fi are a lot more specific. You know, like back in the 50s or even like the 70s with Star Wars, they're like the AI were just goofy sidekicks, or even going up as recent as the 80s with the Terminator series, you know, the 80s and the 90s. Pretty much all the movie had to say was robots bad, you know. But now we're getting into very specific questions about robotics, like, okay, if I put my brain into a computer, is that computer version of me still me? Or like the new movie Selfless, what exactly are the ethical concerns of me as an old man imprinting my brain onto the brain of a younger man so that I get to almost live a second life again as myself with all the same knowledge I have now?
Right.
Very specific, very more, you know, a lot more nuanced kind of ideas regarding that. Even like, since you talk sci-fi, you got to talk time travel a little bit. Even the films about time travel are becoming more and more complex as we're, you know, since we're the generation that grew up nitpicking Back to the Future and all and how many DeLoreans are in 1955 at the moment.
Right.
Which the numbers are like between like 3 and 5, depending on how you count it. You know, nowadays we're getting movies like Primer and what was the other one? Time Criminals or
Time. There's one, Looper, maybe? Maybe you're talking about Looper.
Well, there was Looper, but there was a Spanish one as well. That was like a time travel horror movie.
Right, okay.
They go back like just a minute into the past. And so even the time travel movies are reflecting a lot more of our knowledge of time travel itself.
Right.
You know, as before there was a lot more leeway with it, and it was a lot more, you know, freewheeling with the rules of it. You know, there were no serious discussions about, okay, how exactly does this work in Back to the Future? The most complex we got was 2 separate timelines in Back to the Future 2. And even that explanation was like maybe a minute. So you can see all the ideas where they were once a lot more simplistic and lent for more grand storytelling. The place sci-fi is going to now, it seems, is a lot more small-scale introspective with very complex ideas that are being grappled with.
Well, exactly. It's you can almost see that happen when it goes from you know, the the 80s was very focused, I think, on having these grandiose sets, and it was all kind of like black and without color. And then it slowly focuses in on the robot, as an actual character. So that happens in the Terminator, obviously. And then now what you see is like it becomes very much about the brain, about the inner reality of people, where we talked about transcendence and all the other artificial intelligence films that really explore the epicness of what you can think rather than what you can see.
Yeah. Well, in the 80s, too, they also had a lot of alien movies in the 80s.
Yeah.
That's when you got, you had Alien right at 79, E.T. at 82, The Thing at 82, The Fly at 86, The Predator at 87, They Live at 88. So the 80s was also a very big kind of aliens year.
Yeah.
Wasn't that around the time when Carl Sagan wrote Contact?
I think so, yeah. But like the alien as a character is, in sort of this discussion is very similar to the robot. Basically, it's like the non-human character that is kind of out of human control.
Yeah, but I think also a lot of times when they use aliens in movies, they're using it less so to talk about the alien itself and more so to talk about the humans reacting to the alien.
Oh, absolutely.
And the alien as a reflection of us as a society. Almost kind of turning a mirror onto ourselves and saying, what would we like? What would we look like to a group of completely different people?
Right. Well, that's the interesting, thing is like how will we be perceived if we are actually observed,
Well, largely, I think it'll probably be nuanced, largely. But the films that do tend to tackle that subject, they explore it from a lot of interesting angles.
Right.
And we could talk about The Thing versus E.T. when they first came out in 1982, and why it was that one failed when the other didn't, when now it's universally recognized as one of the best horror films of that time, and probably the best practical effects horror film ever made.
I mean, is that because of the concept being too far ahead of its time, or?
Well, specifically, when you look at The Thing and when you listen to the people who made it at the time and what they say about it, they say that it was E.T. that killed The Thing when it first came out.
Right.
Because E.T. came before, and everybody was in love with the idea of the cute, cuddly alien that was, sweet and soft. And so when they saw The Thing, where you had heads melting off table and a very kind of nihilistic, depressing ending, people didn't like it very much.
Right.
And maybe that could reflect the political dealings going on at the time. Let me see. When was Ronald Reagan elected?
Are we going to get into some American politics here?
Well, no, but I mean that could factor into it. I mean, the Reagan era in America has very specific connotations and effects on the history. And
Right.
he was elected right in 1981. So you could also say maybe there was still that kind of like, yay, America fever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think E.T. probably catered to that a lot better than The Thing. Especially because it had I believe it had a lot of that kind of almost like it had a lot of that 50s charm to it, almost, you could say.
Right.
Spielberg is a master of getting that whimsy. Sure, you have cops that are bad in The Thing, but there's no like extreme violence or anything.
No.
Yet just a few years later, as some people are becoming more disillusioned, he's able to do They Live and have a massive success with it. So
it's also for the filmmaker to just hit it on the right note, I suppose. Like, because I'm always wondering, on a grander scale of filmmaking, like, is it the filmmaker that sets the trend or the audience, basically?
Ooh, well, I guess you could say the filmmaker sparks the discussion, because a lot of what he chooses to eventually talk about or showcase in the film is stuff that he's been thinking about at that time.
Right.
And if he's tuned in with himself and what's going on in the world, chances are a lot of other people are thinking about that time at the time. So if he's working in that sense to where this is very kind of topical stuff or this is stuff that relates, it could very much hit a trend with the audience and take off. But
Right.
then you have that issue of balance that you need to get where the film can't just be relevant for that like period of 10 years. You also have to seek longevity with your films. You want something that'll last and not date very easily.
Well, this is something I've talked about with Jim Edgar, my director of photography, about science fiction and specifically sort of future films that deal with the future. I think it's important as a filmmaker to always set your films in such a future that you won't survive it. Because, like, I don't know about the writer of Back to the Future 2, for instance, whether or not he or she is still alive, but all I know is that it's 2015 and, you know, I'm still waiting for Jaws 6.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that is always the problem with going like 15 years in the future is you wind up looking foolish when it does get here. And I believe that was Robert Zemeckis that...
Right. I just want to break in here. I just had a comment from Kenneth Peterson. Star Crystal is combining Aliens and E.T., starting off like an Aliens horror movie and ending more like E.T., also having a heavy religious message.
Oh, interesting.
It is.
Kenneth, he's a big fan of mine on YouTube, so it's nice to see him.
Cool. Yeah, he said something about, just to do that then, he said something about Zardos as well. He didn't like it at all, and he thought Sean looked like an ugly hooker. So I think I share his opinion on that one.
Oh, you're not a big Zardos fan?
Well, I mean, as I said, I just scrubbed through it, and all I could see was basically sort of orgies. So I haven't seen the film. I've just literally scrubbed through it.
Yeah, it's a really weird movie, and you know, every critic has like those one or two movies that they like, and everybody else is like, huh? Oh, I guess Zardos is one of those for me.
I do wonder about the religious message, though, because I find that interesting that in a lot of sci-fi there are very strong analogs to religion.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of the issues that we grapple with in sci-fi are things that have previously been explained in that kind of religious aspect.
Right.
You know, like, is there a way that we can live forever? Is there a way that we can avoid, certain demise? Is there a way that the species can survive in spite of all the odds saying that it will eventually die out? Right. There's all kinds of all kinds of like kind of immortality questions, I guess you could say, that we grapple with in sci-fi, especially today, with notions of like preserving life by offloading your brain onto a computer or put it into somebody else's body, and those are directly kind of religious questions because you're talking about cheating death.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that, and I think also, obviously, they've kind of hammered this point home really bad in the latest incarnations, but the early sort of Superman films, kind of, in those days could be kind of put under the sci-fi banner because the superhero film wasn't necessarily invented as a genre yet.
Right.
And it's very much like, this one man that is kind of the savior of all, standing up and defending the world, even though he might not be entirely from here.
Yeah. Well, and superheroes are even more steeped in mythology than sci-fi. So you can definitely find those connotations in there. I mean, now they overtly put Jesus imagery in Superman films, so
right,
that's definitely there.
Have you seen Star Crystal?
I have not. I've got it on my watch list now, though.
Right. I'll have to watch it as well, because I personally don't know anything of the film or the religious message in it. So.
Oh, yeah. No, I always get great recommendations for films. I discovered, like, most of the films I know about now.
Wow.
I do wonder if he's talking about the 1995 Galaxis, which is also known as Star Crystal, or the
Right.
1986 Star Crystal.
It must be the 86 one, right?
Yeah, I'm thinking. Can you
Hold
drop
on.
your camera?
Yep.
Man, you were looking so professional there for a little bit.
For a little bit, wasn't it?
Yeah. And now you're out of focus.
It's not blurry, yeah.
Oh, great. Well, that's just gonna have to be the thing then.
Oh.
Let me just restart that, and we'll have audio for a while.
Well,
All right, sure.
Videos.
Okay, hold on. Anyways, we're still on the audio.
All right, that's good. So,
So where were we?
oh man, I don't know where we were. We got all trailed off. Well, what are your like favorite what are your like top 5 favorite sci-fi films? And what about the message in those films is what gravitates you towards them?
Wow. Well, I'm gonna have to wing this while I'm trying to fix the camera, but
Wing.
I'm going to start off with the Cherry 2000 film I mentioned earlier. As I said, it's a really sort of crappy 80s flick. But somehow, just the way that the main character connected with his robot, his human analog, that just sort of, really made me...
Oh, you went mute. I would say the plot for that, even though I haven't seen it, it does kind of sound similar to the movie that was just released recently, Her, with Scarlett
Right.
Johansson, where a man falls in love with his operating system.
Well, it's kind of that way. In Her, it's like she doesn't have an actual physical body. In Cherry 2000, the whole thing is a lot more physical. You know, like it's an actual sort of like human analog flesh and wires kind of situation.
Yeah.
And what I really liked about it is that like he loves that robot so much that even though he could have a better model, he doesn't want it. Like he just wants to go back to having that exact robot.
Right.
So you could say that technically he does seriously in all ways and shapes like love this, what you could almost say, person.
Right.
So well, that's one.
All right. 4 more.
I have to say, and this is probably not like one of my best picks, but AI by Kubrick and Spielberg really, again, because I saw it probably in the right time of my life, I really just like the feel of it. Sort of double ending notwithstanding, I like that film a lot, and I watch it still when I need that specific feeling of, it's sort of right in between gloomy and still upbeat and fairy tale like,
So it somehow manages to capture a little bit of both Kubrick and Spielberg in that sense?
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've seen a few scenes from it, and they look like I believe like the robot graveyard and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, some of the scenes I've seen from it are really interesting, so I definitely want to check it out eventually.
I mean, for me, AI, like as an aspiring filmmaker, that was a film that really sort of said, like, I wish I had made that film, and I would have probably stopped it at the first ending. Sure, like that's a different discussion, but for the rest, for me, that film is pretty much flawless, except for one little continuity error in there, but I won't bore you with that.
Mm.
And let me see here. I guess Terminator 2 is another one that really does it for me. More so than Terminator 1 because of the connection between the cyborg and the boy.
Mm.
I need 2 more, don't I?
I don't know. I'm kind of more partial to the first Terminator.
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, sure.
It's silly. A lot of conventional wisdom says the second is better, but there are some scenes that I really like in the first one, like like the introduction of Arnold being him ripping another man's heart out of his chest, or
right.
Or he finds Sarah Connor by just looking up Sarah Connor in the phone book and assassinating every single one until he gets her.
Well, yeah, absolutely. No, I
Or the fabulous twist ending. I mean, the ending of that film is really good. The twist that they put on there.
Sure. Do you think War Games qualifies as science fiction?
War Games. You will have to refresh my memory on that one.
So this is where Matthew Broderick hacks into the Pentagon or something. Well, to Missile Defense Command, he hacks in there accidentally, and he almost launches a nuclear, between the Russians and the Americans, a nuclear sort of war.
Oh, yeah, no, I think you could count that.
I mean, that was, again, sort of as a programmer, that was kind of like a thing for me, especially because there was some accuracy into the way that he scanned for phone numbers and stuff, so that kind of like tickled me.
And that does bring up an interesting question of do you think a film about hacking is done better when it's done as a sci-fi or when it's done as kind of like a crime film like Swordfish or something like that?
Wow. It's difficult. Like, I don't think there's ever been. Maybe War Games is the best you can do when it comes to hacking films.
Well, I mean, Hollywood doesn't really try when it comes to hacking. They give it like stupid graphics and everything, you know.
Well, to be honest, in the Matrix, when Trinity hacks into the agent's building and that kind of stuff, that is actually an existing exploit that she's running. So they kind of try, but they just can't capture it. And then recently I saw Black Hat, and I couldn't even keep my concentration on it. I forgot everything about the film. I mean, it's a difficult thing to capture because it is actually, in practice, so boring to the onlooker, you know?
Right.
So I think, if you want to do it like properly in Hollywood style, maybe the film Hackers is the best one, you know?
Yeah, maybe. I'm just wondering if you could set it into a far-flung sci-fi and do something that focused specifically on hacking, if that would be the best way to capture it as we see it now.
Well, I guess they tried that with the Johnny Mnemonic film, right? Like that was.
Oh, I remember Johnny Mnemonic. That was pretty good. And wasn't that where people were hacking each other's brains?
Well, yeah, he was storing information in his brain, and he kind of like overflowed his brain store capacity, so he had to get it out within a time limit. And then they had a dolphin hack into his mind.
Because I was going to say, wasn't there also like a virus or something that was destroying people's mind chips and it was like scrambling their brains?
Yeah.
Because now that you think about it, with the idea of cybernetics becoming more and more of a possibility, and the idea of maybe people eventually augmenting their brain with cybernetics, or at least different parts of their body, that film does. You could remake that film today and do something very good with it, you know. Just the idea of people being able to hack into people with cybernetic enhancements and what kind of danger that would pose. And it would have a lot of parallels to today, where so much of our information, as we talked about last time, so much of our information is stored on servers, and yet the people that run the servers don't protect them enough to keep them safe from hackers. And so it leads to like huge giant hacks every few months. Every year or so.
It's a funny thing. It's been very clear to me and a lot of other people, because I read their articles in the 90s, that it doesn't matter how many layers of security you build on top of something, the more layers of security you build, the more exploit potential there is. So,
right, but the people that do it now don't have hardly any.
Right.
I mean, if you look at the big Sony hack that happened back in what was it, late 2014?
Right.
Most likely wasn't North Korea, by the way. It was probably disgruntled employees.
Yeah.
One of the things they found out was that Sony had a file of passwords on a text document that basically said passwords.
Yeah.
And I know there is a thing about, you can't build the perfect security system, but you cannot put your passwords in a text file that says password, you know?
Well, and see, and that's where it becomes, again, the human connection. So, like, how humans interact with technology, and I build a lot of technology for people to use, like web applications and stuff. And it surprises me time and time again how no matter how many arrows I point to a certain button, like click here for the next step, they will just not see it. They will be like, what do I do next? And I believe, to my heart, I believe that this is because these people refuse to engage with the technology in a positive manner, you know, in a way of like, I am going to get this because I want to get this, and not I want it to work just because it needs to serve me. The technology isn't ready to serve yet. You have to actually coerce it to do what you want it to do.
Yeah, it's not completely intuitive yet. Yeah, and so that would be like interesting stuff to look at, where it's like the government has to send off, you know, warnings to people with cybernetic enhancements. Look, you need to make your passwords more than 4 characters. It can't be password. People are taking over your body. Get serious here.
Well, it's interesting because it can get even weirder, because recently I think it was a German team had actually stopped a artificial heart from a distance of like a few feet with a laptop, you know?
Yeah, well, and like the cars with the computers in them.
That's it.
There are videos that show hackers able to take control of the cars and do all kinds of crazy stuff with them.
That's it. And it you know, it slowly sort of circles towards that, and it almost becomes a cliche, but towards that Skynet kind of thing. Like, what if one of these things became self-aware, you know, and started making decisions? Like, it's so many things are connected with each other now. So
Right, but if we're thinking along the current line of thinking, wouldn't something more dangerous than Skynet being an individual with the power to get into Skynet? You know,
well, I
and
mean, it's very possible.
and play war games with it.
Well, it's going to be a very interesting thing to watch for sure. Like, you know, which one of the realities is eventually going to ring true.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I think another one of the really interesting concepts explored was in iRobot. Whether it's a good film or not, I really, really like that idea of being able to hack the logic of humans. So we have the 3 laws of robotics, you know, and that the artificial intelligence finds a way to say, actually, these laws contradict each other, and I have to kill humanity because I need to protect it from itself.
Oh yeah. Well, there was a similar thing in RoboCop, where he had the prime directives.
Right. That's another film, by the way. I still need a 5th one anyway, so I'm going to put RoboCop in there because, yeah, I don't know why, because I was too young when I first saw it, but that made a real impact on me.
Oh, that would be in your top 5?
Oh, definitely. And I need
Yeah.
to put a Dutch director in there anyway.
RoboCop is a goodie.
So,
How many? Yeah, go ahead.
well, I was going to ask you for your top 5, obviously.
Okay, good. Let me see. What do we got? I would put Zardoz in last. I mean, it's a weird choice, but if you get AI, I at least get Zardoz. For the reasons I mentioned before, I do think it has, even though it looks weird as fuck, and some people might find it boring, I think there's a very interesting mythology in there, and there are some very interesting questions in there about immortality and what exactly would happen if you live forever, and the crystals and how they work in the film are absolutely fascinating. Plus, I mean, you want to see Sean Connery dressed up like that. He just looks so good. I would also put Existenz on there. I mean, you have to have at least one Cronenberg sci-fi, and while Videodrome might be a better film, and a lot of people say that Existence is kind of a more lighthearted Videodrome. Videodrome is so cryptic, I still haven't quite gotten the message that he was trying to give with that one. Whereas Existence is just a real fun kind of little roller coaster ride of a movie. And it does kind of get you sucked up to the point where you're not sure what is real and what's virtual reality by the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere on the list would have to be Alphaville, I think. I did. It's pretty much like the only Jean-Luc Godard film that I actually really like.
Right.
Because while he is, a very big innovator in the world of film, he's one of those directors that I think I mentioned before where I feel like there's a certain degree of pomp in his movies, where he likes to. I think he's almost more concerned with showing off a lot of the times than he is with actually like doing a compelling narrative and dynamic characters and stuff like that.
Right.
And emotionality is a big part of why I watch films, so that kind of turns me off to him. But Alphaville has that kind of story. It's really fascinating what happens. The battle between this really gruff detective, Lemmy Caution, played by the guy who actually played Lemmy Caution in all the B movies that led up to it, squaring off against this artificial intelligence. The fact that they did the sci-fi by just shooting in kind of futuristic-y looking areas of Paris, I thought was hilarious. The fact that he just goes around like straight shooting people, which is completely unlike any noir detective you've ever seen. It breaks so many conventions, and the story is just fascinating. The idea that like the people have been brainwashed into not even knowing what words like love mean anymore.
Right.
And there's so many. You can go on forever about that movie. What else would I put up there? I guess because I want to do a Carpenter as well, so I'd probably go with They Live. I think.
Right.
It doesn't have Kurt Russell, which is a big minus against it, but it's got that amazing fight scene. The whole element, the whole conspiracy element in the film is really fun. And I actually have an interesting theory on the film that it's actually, because a lot of people say it's, it has this real deep conspiracy, aspect that's lying underneath the surface of everything. Right. But I kind of think that's very much the surface of it. And that deep down, it's actually just a really fun, goofy, like action-y movie. The way he's running off, spouting quips and shooting people in the face and stuff. I think that's the secret behind it, is that it's actually just a real movie that hooks you in with this very over-the-top conspiracy that they do.
Right. Well, I mean, it's something that a lot of directors like to sort of play into those conspiracy theories around them.
Well, definitely. I mean, the conspiracy theories and the urban legends are kind of the modern-day mythology.
Right.
And so they really work well together. And that one, the They Live conspiracy is one that's been around forever, that everyone at the top is part of this cabal and that they're secretly keeping humanity down. And he explained it in such an interesting way by bringing in the aliens and the gimmick with the sunglasses. It worked so well.
Yeah.
I think I would also say Brazil. I think I'd have to put that up there because it really.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think I kind of lost the plot in my list because Brazil has been one of my most influential films as well, but. Let me hear your thoughts on the film, though.
Well, it's a remake of 1984, the book by the famous George Orwell book, and the reason why everyone says Orwellian today when anything remotely related to surveillance comes up.
Right.
The thing about 1984 for me is I'm not actually a big fan of the book. I much prefer George Orwell's Animal Farm because both of both of those books are allegories about communism and socialism, specifically Soviet style and a little bit of Chinese style communism,
Mhm.
and their attacks against it. But what I don't like about 1984 is he is so blatant with the references. And
Mhm.
if you've read anything about Stalinist Russia, or you know about the history of the Chinese government and their policies, it feels like I'm reading a history book. It's basically Stalinist Russia with cameras. Like the fact that everyone is spying on everybody else and reporting on everyone is Stalinist Russia. The fact that they worship the great leader like a god is Stalinist Russia. The way they describe the great leader is very much how Stalin looks. The way they describe the great enemy of the people is very much how Trotsky looks.
Mhm.
Um, the idea of the constant war, of the economy and the famine, that's all Stalinist Russia. Um, the torture, all of it's there. It's just the only thing they added was the idea of cameras everywhere.
Right.
And even then, you already had that threat in Stalinist Russia because anyone on the street could be secret police that would rat you out. And so this just added that extra degree to it. But what I like about Brazil is he took that basic idea of 1984 and he did something completely different with it and almost used the film as a way to comment against the Hollywood-type bureaucracy that
Mhm.
plagues the filmmaking industry. And so using a script, using a story that I feel is kind of tired to begin with, he did something really new and refreshing with it. And the world is so beautiful that he created,
Oh,
and it's got
absolutely.
so many amazing sequences in it.
I,
It
I
just
do, I
and
do
the
have to say.
cameos.
I do have to say about Brazil, it really also clearly reflects that Terry Gilliam, who is, I believe, an American. No, he is an American.
He's an He was the American Python. Yeah, he was an
Right,
American. He went over to the UK. I believe. I don't think it was for college. I think it was for a comic job.
right.
He started out doing the comics, and then he went there. He met up with the Python guys, and that's when he got involved with them.
Because there is actually a sketch in Monty Python which predates Brazil, and it's a sketch about a delivery of, I believe, either a cooker or a refrigerator. And it deals with exactly the same thing. Like, you have to have the right form before we can cross the threshold of this, domicile.
Oh,
So
that
before they
also
were,
reminds me of their. If you saw The Meaning of Life,
mhm,
there's a similar skit that they did in there with the organ donor.
right,
Where, sorry, we've come to collect your organs, but I'm still using it. Oh, well, you signed the forms,
that's it.
And they just start cutting up. They just start cutting them up right there on his kitchen table.
But that really, really reflects the sort of the UK mindset, and how over here it is really all about, do you have the right form, and is it filled in, stamped, and presented to the correct person. If not, then we're closed.
Yeah, well, in that sense, it very much the film very much reflects that frustration.
Yeah.
And Rick Gilliam is also a constant frustration with the Hollywood system as well when he became his own director.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's always been kicking against that. With the Zero Theorem, that was especially clear because he couldn't even get it distributed.
Yeah, and now he's trying to go back and do Don Quixote again.
I know. I mean, as long as he doesn't put an over 80-year-old actor on a horse, he'll be fine.
That actor looked good, though. He looked like
good.
Don Quixote.
He did.
How is he supposed to know the guy would be able to ride a horse? It's not like he could do coconuts again. He did that bit.
No, it's a difficult film for him. I hope he makes it. I mean, I love the
Yeah, it's a
stories.
real passion project of his, and it would be nice so we could stop saying the Quixote curse.
Right. Well, and they are absolutely amazing stories, each and every one.
Yeah.
Like, really fantastical stuff.
I haven't gotten to read him yet because I really want to learn Spanish.
Right.
Well, read him in the native language.
They were read to us in school, so.
Yep.
Yep. So, let's see, where are we with, do we have any other decades to cover?
I think we basically got him in the points we were talking about with there. Were there any live comments or questions that you see?
It was just Kenneth Penderson or Peterson. Sorry for mispronouncing.
He's the only one that commented so far.
So far, yeah, he did say that he indeed meant the 1986 version of Star
Oh, okay,
Crystal.
cool. That's good to know. Yeah. I wonder what's the most confusing sci-fi movie you ever saw? The one that just really stumped you.
Absolutely Primer.
But
I mean,
that was designed to stump you. There's 9 different timelines in that film. If you didn't know, you need a graph to watch it.
Yeah. Besides that, I would say maybe Dune.
June. What's that about?
Well, Dune is about it's kind of like it's more sort of in the style of like a Game of Thrones, where there's this whole backstory with all the
Frank Herbert.
houses and you know, families, sort of that kind of stuff, and it's a bit too big of a concept to you know, to boil down into just a few words, but yeah. I mean,
okay. So for me,
you probably should see that film, though.
I probably should. It sounds pretty good. I love anything that's described as Game of Thronesian.
Well, no, I mean, I personally am not a fan of Game of Thrones, and to be honest with you, the director took his name off because David Lynch directed it, but it's an Alan Smithy film.
You're not a big Game of Thrones fan?
Not really, no. You want to sidetrack to Game of Thrones?
What?
I said, do you want to sidetrack to Game of Thrones?
Oh no, we don't have to. I'm a big fan of it. Although a lot of people are getting fed up with the show.
Well, I'm sure that what it does for a lot of people is because it's so complex and there's so much to discover in it. You know, it's very engaging. I just don't like the way it's done. You know.
Yeah, but the show is also cutting out a lot of good stuff from the books.
I'm sure, yeah.
Simplifying stuff even more. So that's a bit of a problem. I think the most confusing one for me, just to give a different answer, I'll go with The Man Who Fell to Earth with David Bowie.
So run me sort of the plot a little bit, because I haven't seen that.
Well, it's basically just it's like the E.T. story. He's an alien. He crash lands on Earth, and then he spends his time trying to build a spaceship to get back. Instead of being this cute, cuddly little alien, he's like an alcoholic. So.
How does that work out?
Well, he not too good.
Was he an alcoholic before he fell to Earth, or?
No, I don't know if they didn't have any water on his home planet.
Oh, okay.
They had no water. They were dying of like dehydration and stuff. And so he came to Earth to find a way to bring water back, I think.
Right. Now, see, water triggered for me an interesting question that is totally unrelated to what you were just talking about. But when we think of the film Idiocracy, which
that's the most accurate sci-fi movie ever, I think.
Well, that's what I think. So I recently went through a job interview process as a programmer a couple of months ago, and one of the things that came up was this company was having trouble hiring programmers because this is a theory according to the guy who hired me. His theory was we're making devices so simple to use now. We're so much focused on the user experience to make it as simple as possible that nobody tinkers anymore. Like how I would disassemble my first computer upon arrival, you wouldn't do that with an iPad, especially it's practically impossible to disassemble a gadget these days. And
right, but the Apple products are geared towards people that are not technologically savvy and want like the most user-friendly, simple. That's why a lot of computer people will go with Android, because iPhone locks you up in a lot of situations and will restrict your control of what you can do and what apps you can download and stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And what I'm wondering basically is that true? Is like, because we make it too easy to use these products, are we losing the people slowly through the generations that actually know how these things work? And could we potentially end up in a world where we feed Gatorade to the plants? You know.
But Brondo makes plants grow. No, I think how quickly the technology is advancing, and because of the fact that the millennials have not entirely come up yet and replaced like the pre-internet people in the job market, you know, to the point where we're like the dominant portrayals on media and everything,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more obvious to see, like that's a more obvious thing to see is the people that don't know how to use computers, you know, and that are completely like, because it's getting so much harder so faster that people are just having trouble to keep up. I mean, the interface is getting simpler, but what exactly you want to do with it, there are so many more options now, you know, and so I think because I think overall we'll have more people getting more tech savvy. I mean, millennials on average have grown up with the internet. You know, like you got introduced to it at what age?
Well, I think when I was 6, I wanted a Nintendo, and we were not rich enough, so I got a Commodore 64, and I had to like punch in all the code manually. So
Yeah, see, I think we got our first PC in maybe like it was back in New Jersey, so it was like early 2000s.
Right.
I believe it ran Windows XP, or maybe no, it might have been earlier.
Right.
It might have been Windows 98, but it was. So I had computers since I was about 10.
Right.
I think, like 6 or 10, and so I've always had like. And so, in more and more generations come up, technology has been a part of their lives, their entire lives. So it's like a second skin to them using the internet. But the people that have not adjusted to it yet are going to be more and more alienated and isolated. And so that's more and more noticeable now because of just how easy it is to get lost.
But I think sort of the real question here is like whether or not the people that are growing up with the modern technology are actually getting the opportunity to properly tinker with it. You know, when you buy a laptop these days, like if it's a unibody laptop, you can't even open it up, for instance, and everything is soldered to the motherboard, so you can't, you know, quickly switch out something like a processor or something.
Yeah, but what about all the gamers that build their own custom rigs?
Oh, that's fair enough. I guess gaming is.
Or what about all like the artists that are now learning how to use programs like Photoshop and GIMP and different drawing programs to become artists? Or the mass amount of people getting into video editing and are learning programs like that. Or if you're doing a laser printing, Inkscape, learning stuff like that, how to design vector art. There's or 3D animation. It's basically specialization. You know, computers are very new, and so we're just now starting to develop the big career paths that'll be involved with it. Before there was only, you know, hardware and rudimentary software, but now you've got a whole different load of areas you can go into. And so not everybody will be able to take apart a computer and tell you what a motherboard is, but you'll be surprised at what different people will be able to do. Some people will be able to tell you exactly how to do a perfect, you know, online presence. They'll tell you how to have a great, you know, they'll know how to do a Twitter, an Instagram, a Vine, you know, they'll be able to tell you how to set all of those up to get yourself maximum followers. Some people will be able to do this and that. And
I guess it's quite interesting, sort of where I'm coming from personally, to see. I'm starting to see this gap, you know, this sort of generation gap between myself and, you know, sort of younger generations of internet users, where you already mentioned Vine, and, you know, today you sort of like tried to make me sign up to some sort of a Kick service or something, you know, and I'm already starting to sort of develop like this you know, gap in front of that, where I'm saying like I don't really know what this stuff is about. Like Vine is a 6-second video, and I know you can do a lot of cool stuff with that, but it just doesn't really appeal to me.
Have you watched some Vine compilations?
Well, the only guy I know is the magician guy, Zach King. because as a video editor, I've seen his earlier work on YouTube, and I saw his Vine videos with the magic tricks. You know.
Oh, I watch comedy guys on Vine. Okay, every few months I'll catch up with King Bach.
Right.
I'll do the King Bach compilations that come out, and the guy has like real comedic timing, and I think that could be like, you know, that could just be a new area in comedy or something like that. You know, kind of how quick can you get a punchline out there and work it in a way that it's, you know, funny and not a stupid dick joke every time.
Right on. Yeah. No, it's quite interesting, and I wonder how this will translate like later on to filmmakers, because I suppose, you know, these sort of up and coming generations are going to make films one day as well. You know,
Yeah.
hopefully it will be a bit longer than 6 seconds, because I don't see myself going to the theaters watching a compilation.
Look at a movie like Airplane. That movie was like loaded with jokes. You were laughing about every 6 seconds in that movie.
Right.
So you never know how it could transfer. We already have some people coming out of the internet age. If I can pull up the guy, I believe I mentioned him last time, the English director that I absolutely love, Ben Wheatley.
Right.
He's like the first. He's the only real film director working right now that I know of that started in the internet. He started doing videos on a personal website, as he started before YouTube. So he was back in, like, I think it was like 2002, 2004, and he picked up a lot of his editing skills there, and then went out and started doing his movies. So we haven't really had that generation come up yet and define filmmaking. And right now we're still kind of drowned out, especially in American cinema. We're still kind of drowned out with these big tentpole movies, big Hollywood tentpole movies. So we haven't really seen the artistic expression of this generation yet, because we're being drowned out by nostalgia at the moment.
Right. And I would say also sort of the older directors that are kind of, I actually don't know how old you are, but like, just to give you a frame of reference, I'm 33. And I see
23. So you're 10 years older.
Oh, am I? Thank you. Well, but I'm seeing, you know, a couple of filmmakers on the internet, you know, in varying degrees of popularity, you know, coming up with short films, and they're very reminiscent of, you know, kind of Spielberg type tactics and that kind of stuff. And as beautiful as that is, and as great as those films are, like, it still hasn't shown me yet where we're going to with this medium, basically.
Well, I mean, it's really hard to predict a wave before it hits, you know?
Yeah.
We won't really know what it'll look like. I can tell you, though, if history is any indicator, it'll involve extremely low-budget films using non-professional, untrained, first-time or non-actors. It'll be mostly in real locations and not on sets, with possibly very little green screen. And it'll be real-world issue-focused plots,
right,
as opposed to the fantastical ones that we're seeing now. That's just going based off of every other major film movement in history, what they've followed. So.
Well, you say not a lot of green screen though, but like somehow it reminded me of the guy who did Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. You know, very reminiscent of the 50s era of science fiction.
Oh God, that movie! Oh.
But I don't know if you're aware of. There's a 20-minute short somewhere on the internet on YouTube where actually he shows you how he got that, and I believe it was a $70 million film in the end. How he got that budget was by shooting 20 minutes of this film against a blue screen in his garage with an old MacBook Pro and some like After Effects software on it.
Yeah, but Sky Captain looked like the feature film looked like that.
I know. Actually,
it didn't really translate that way.
The difference is very minimal between the short and what came out in the actual feature film, except that you can see that, there's definitely a raise in budget, but the style was exactly the same. And I find it amazing because he was able to make something on such a grand scale from his garage with inferior hardware.
Yeah. Well, I mean, have you seen Kung Fury recently?
Yeah.
What did you think of that?
I quite like that style of filmmaking. Like,
And that was mostly green screen, so I mean, it is improving. Or look at Freddie Wan
oh yeah.
on YouTube. He did that guy's a man. The shit. It looks like real life shit when he does his stuff.
No, I know, but they've got some huge production budgets behind them. Like.
Oh well, yeah, because they've been doing it for a while and they got a real established audience.
Yeah, and they've got some real in-house skill when it comes to
Exactly. Yeah, they're real talented, and so that'll be a major defining aspect as well. Is the filmmakers will be very talented in the, if it does wind up being CG heavy, then the filmmakers that come out of it will be very talented in that area. They'll most likely be doing it themselves.
Now, do you think there will be a shift towards films that are actually shot for virtual reality?
How would you shoot a film for virtual reality?
See, now I had an early idea. My first experience with virtual reality was somewhere in the mid-90s when there was a technological fair that I got some tickets to for some reason. And I saw a 90s version of, well, I actually did a 90s version of VR, and it was exactly the same experience as it is now, except now you have better graphics, but marginally better. And the way I see it, to shoot for virtual reality is you shoot POV from all the main characters. So what you would be able to do, and this would be actually highly monetizable, because you would be able to become any of the characters in that film by the switch of a button. So you could go to one film multiple times and experience it from the POV of a different character.
Now that's a really interesting idea. Because the idea had me a bit hesitant at first, because the whole idea for me of virtual reality is you're in there and you can participate with it. So it seemed like doing anything but a video game would almost take away a dimension from it. But if you had a film like that and you had all the characters written out like that, that would be really interesting to see. It'd almost be like a choose your own adventure.
No, absolutely. Like, and as I said, like, it's highly monetizable because people already go, 5 times to Lord of the Rings 3. So this time they will go 15 times because they want to see it from different angles.
Yeah. How much footage would you have to shoot, though?
Well, I mean,
if you're doing it like a real-time story, it would be 2 hours of footage for every single character in there.
It's either that, or you just attach a GoPro to everybody's head and you wipe them out in After Effects.
Oh man.
I got an off-track question from Kenneth. He was asking me if I was Dutch, and that's yes. He says I'm 43 and I'm 33, but I might not be pronouncing words that well. And he's asking me if I know Terence Hill and Bud Spencer movies, and I do. So there you go.
Oh, nice.
I actually quite enjoyed those. That was in the times where I was like watching films with my dad in the weekend, and we'd go to the video store and pick up 6 films, and like a lot of those were Bud Spencer and Terence Hill films.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, Kenneth had told me that because I actually reviewed the. I haven't reviewed all their films, but I did the 2 Trinity movies.
Right.
And well, actually the 3 Trinity movies, because they did one in the '90s as a reunion, but they couldn't call it Trinity because the director had the rights to it, and they didn't want him to direct, and he got all pissy and wouldn't let him call it Trinity. But it's basically that. Right. But yeah, and he apparently said that they're like a big holiday tradition over there in Europe, where everybody kind of watches Trinity for Christmas or something like that.
That's funny. What might very well be possible is that they are always programmed on television during the holidays. That's very possible. Because I remember seeing them a lot. Like, there's this one specific scene where they're like in a shootout or something, and I know I saw that every year. I saw that scene. So it's probably something to do with television programming.
Oh, that's crazy. And, yeah, because
Yeah.
here in America we've got like my generation at least we've got Nightmare Before Christmas.
Right.
Although that's always a confusing one because do you do one on Halloween or do you do one on Christmas?
Both.
It's a two-holiday movie. And what was on TV a lot was those old, they were like puppet-style Christmas movies.
Right.
There were like specific Christmas stories like Rudolph and Frosty the Snowman and like how Santa Claus became Santa Claus and the one with the heat miser, you know, but they were done in like that weird kind of puppet style.
Right.
Only seen done in those specific movies. I've like never seen it done again. It was weird.
But yeah,
So-
I mean, films in VR, I'd like to see where that goes, because I don't know, I don't have the budget personally to actually, you know, perform this act of making a film from multiple perspectives.
Well, if you wrote the film in such a way, you know, to minimize budget, you know, maybe do it in one location and have just a set amount of actors and do a simple plot. For example, you had it in like one house, like a 3-story house. You maybe limited it to 5 or 6 actors, and you had it be a murder mystery. Boom, that could work real easy.
There you go.
It can't be a movie with a lot of downtime because then you wind up switching on a character and then the bathroom where they're making carrots, and it's like, okay, this is kind of boring.
No, but I'm really wondering, because I've discussed this before with people, sort of the fate of cinemas, like, you know, real life, going out to the cinema. You know, is that sort of like dying, or is it still very much alive?
It's evolving from what I've seen. Overseas, cinema is getting really big. People are still going out. That's where Hollywood makes the most of their money, is in emerging markets like China and India and stuff like that. So cinema overseas will still be a big thing. In America, it is dying down in like the terms of like the big Cinemarks and the Cineplexes. But that's due to licensing between the films and the theaters. The theaters hardly make any profit off of the films to begin with anymore, and so now they have to make most of their money on concessions, and people just aren't excited about going there anymore because the film's being shown and everything. But independent cinemas, stuff like the Alamo Drafthouse or the Violent Crown, kind of stuff like that provide like a tailored experience and do special screenings of older movies and have like 35mm projectors and stuff like that. Those kind of specialty cinemas will get bigger because they provide like a whole experience with them.
See, that's interesting, because I believe that the opposite is happening over here.
Secret cinema.
Well, okay, secret cinemas are something that I've definitely done, but the real sort of building where you can go to that is an independent cinema, as much as they're still around, they're also closing, all the time.
Oh yeah, the mom and pop stores are going out, but like the places I'm talking about, they usually serve you food while you're watching the movie too, and they'll get like old exploitation movies and show them. You know, they like attract like a cinephile crowd, and so they build like a dedicated audience to come out and stuff. And then they'll show like weird, obscure movies, or they'll host film festivals there to keep it going.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I do think it'll stick around, but it will definitely change form. It won't be like what we know it today. We're in a transitional period in a lot of ways.
Well, I guess it's sort of time to make up for all the promises. Like if we go back to the sci-fi topic, I guess that's something that maybe it's something I'm personally waiting for, or maybe it's something that lives in a lot of other people as well. But we've always been told, like, the year 2000, and then now we have to kind of relay that forward because we're so far into the year 2000s, and we've been promised all these flying cars and stuff, and we're still not really quite there.
Well, yeah, but one of the things with the flying cars is they weren't a practical invention to begin with. It's one of those things where we could make a flying car, but we really would not want to make a flying car. Because think about how bad people are at driving now.
Mm.
Do you want them being able to fly?
Well, I mean,
And what happens if you run out of gas while you're driving your flying car and you're in the air?
no, that's fair enough. But obviously, the technology would grow in a way such, like you could see that in a scene in iRobot where the cars basically drive themselves. They're not flying there.
Oh,
But
well, I think if we had self-driving cars, which are becoming a bigger and bigger possibility, then we could do flying cars. But I would not trust people to be able to fly cars. Plus, if it was just manually driving them, you would need to have a pilot's license in addition to a driving license. And if you ever played GTA, the flying license is the hardest to get.
well, see, that's another interesting concept. Like playing games versus the real world. I mean, I know it's not entirely film related, but I had to give up on my aspirations of ever driving a car because when I tried getting a license many years ago, I found it to be too much like the video games I used to play in the arcade, and I didn't understand the jeopardy of driving.
Right.
So I was very much influenced by like, oh, if I crash, I just put in another like coin or something, and this all doesn't really matter. So my driving instructor had to like um, save us quite a few times.
Yeah.
So I kind of gave up on that, but
everybody's kind of that way when they get into cars, whether you play video games or not, and that's just because you don't realize you don't realize just how dangerous they are until
right.
you're behind one and you're like, wow, this can plow through stuff. Even going 5 miles an hour, this can crush things.
Right.
I would say that though with video games, there's all those stories about people that played flight simulators and then were able to like go in and like ace pilot exams and stuff, or get like flying ranks in the military. And
I always believed that I was a big Flight Simulator 4 player, which was like DOS graphics, and I always believed, to my soul that I would be able to fly a plane just because of that game.
oh yeah,
Yeah, I don't think it's true, but or not anymore. But I used to think that for sure.
yeah.
I mean, it's very similar to the feeling I used to have when I was like really young and coming out of the cinema. I always used to think I was that character, and I could really revel in that fantasy,
Oh yeah, that's always fun. It is. I would always get like the villains and stuff. I was more attracted to them.
Okay.
Especially like when I was a little kid, I'd wind up like you'd always have that thing of like there's a dark hallway and then all of a sudden this character pops out from behind the corner at the end, And then the scarabs from the Mummy, those were like terrifying.
Right.
Is the idea of it like crawling inside of you and like.
No. Well, I mean, that kind of feeling goes a little bit back to what we were talking about on the last show with the Korean films and the sort of the Asian style cinema, all that sort of that creepiness that's really that terrorizes me.
Oh yeah, you're not a big fan of the Asian horror movies. Did you watch any of the ones I recommended to you?
I haven't yet, no.
Oh, are you too scared?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say it isn't part of that. It's also just purely time constraints.
Oh yeah, and then you got to find all of them too. Some of them might be tough to find.
Well, I don't know.
You got yeah, if you got the good pirating website, you'll be able to find them pretty easy.
That's it.
Yeah. What were you wanting to talk about with regards to Asian cinema, though? Because I know we've been largely looking at sci-fi through an American lens.
That's true.
So maybe to get us back on topic again, what is the difference between the American and the international perspective on science fiction?
Well, I'd have to think for a minute to see if I can find sci-fi that isn't American and isn't Mad Max, because we have that. But I think Mad Max is very much. You can see definitely its Australian roots in it, but it's still also
Oh.
that sort of dystopian kind of thing. It isn't
Well,
far enough.
in other exploitation sci-fi films kind of fit with that narrative, like Dead End Drive-In.
Yeah,
It has a very similar kind of feel to it. So
it's also because you have desert around you, you have that production value, and you can shoot it for free.
no, definitely.
But I don't know. I don't know if you know any sci-fi more from the Asian perspective.
Asian sci-fi. I probably could, but I'm gonna have to mull it over for a second.
I
In the
mean,
meantime, we could talk about A Clockwork Orange,
oh,
and whether
definitely.
that should count as American or English sci-fi. Because
That's
Kubrick
really
is
interesting.
American, but he did spend a shit ton of time in England.
Well, he
Yeah.
shot it. He shot it here in England, right?
Yeah, well, and also seen there was this really good documentary about it being banned in England,
Mm,
and a lot of people basically equated it to being like the quintessential like British sci-fi almost that
right.
like perfectly captured the British youth at that time or something like that, or the ideas of them.
I believe that to be very much true. You know, I'm not British myself, obviously, but I've lived here long enough now to kind of get a good feel for the country. And I think there's definitely a lot in Clockwork Orange that has that specific British feel to it, especially when it comes out to sort of like going out drinking and becoming rowdy. And I understand that
Kind
they
of the general hooliganism.
that's it, and I believe that sort of the drug of choice, even though it was disguised as milk, was very much described as being, something very similar to, amphetamines, like you said, like perks you up and all these things, which, was very much in the youth culture at that time.
And then also the style of dress, which would later go on to kind of, which the punk movement, like some of the more extreme examples of it, I guess you could say,
Oh,
would go on to be
absolutely.
reminiscent of.
Mm. And it also, it very much reflects. I feel here in England there's a lot of control coming from the government. I think we talked about it last time about, like, surveillance cameras being on every corner and in between.
Yes.
And Clockwork Orange is very much about controlling the individual and his thoughts, his or her thoughts. And you either see it our way or you don't see it at all, or we will make you very sick.
Right. Do you think that also relates to the British schools?
Well,
Because there's been a long history of them in entertainment and media being portrayed as a very kind of stifling place that has that a kind of authoritarian view on children.
right. Well,
Education.
I would say that's true for the schools I've experienced in Holland. So I'll say, at the risk of it being wrong, that yes, I think British schools, maybe even more so, are very controlling. A lot of them require you to wear a uniform, for instance,
Yeah.
which
I
that's
mean,
something
like,
completely foreign to me.
yeah, because like Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall, that the imagery they use in the music video was specifically a British school. Um, the film that Malcolm McDowell did got him noticed for Clockwork Orange, that he used as a major kind of influence on how to decide his character of Alex,
Hmm.
uh, was If, which is about a British school.
Okay.
It's If and then 4 dots, so it's an ellipses plus one more dot.
Right.
I hate that title. Why couldn't they just do 3 dots? Nobody does 4 dots. But yeah, so there's been kind of a long history of that, it seems. Or even more recently, that funny comedy show that's taken off like a rocket in the UK, The Inbetweeners.
Right.
Or a sci-fi film, a sci-fi series that was in Britain a little while ago. I don't think it's on anymore. Misfits.
Right. That was amazing, by the way.
And that was them in the reform part of the school where they were doing community service and stuff.
See, that was a really interesting concept because they took characters that was so real, like, especially, like, I don't know if you know the concept of a Chad, but it's I can relate it to you because you say you're from Jersey, right? Or you've been there.
I've been to Jersey, yeah. Although I've
Well,
lived in Texas most of my life now, but
think about the Jersey Shore, and you would have the exact replica of what this sort of chaff concept is,
uh,
And they had this one girl in the Misfits who was the mind reader, right? And she was basically portrayed as the chaff of the whole group. And then
oh, the one that you could never understand what she was saying. The
that's it, and that's the exact that's the exact speech pattern they use everything. So the funny thing about it is though that she was kicked off the show because she was in a taxi cab and she actually threw a racial slur at the taxi driver. So she was actually perfectly cast,
oh wow.
But that was a really great show that for me really portrayed the. I think we talked about this last time as well about the council estates, the thing that you call the not the projects, but something like that.
Oh, about like the inner city, the kind of very kind of poverty stricken areas.
That's it. It's like it's this one big high-rise building with all sort of the core elements all shoved into that, and it's like they're like these little contained mini cities almost. You
Yeah,
know?
we actually used to have some of those in America. The biggest example was Caprini Greens
Hmm.
in Chicago, I believe it was. And there was an entire like gang ecosystem that sprung up in that housing complex
Right.
because the people never, the government never maintained it, and so it fell a lot of areas and it fell into disrepair and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you want to wonder whether or not that like will amplify itself and then will basically reflect things like what you see in the Judge Dredd films.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, short answer is it does, I guess. Is that if you put people and it's not the people's fault if you put them in a place and then you make it to where they really have no options of getting out,
mm,
either by not being able to attain like really meaningful employment or targeting and harassing the community, or just like making the place a dump, like not keeping it repaired like it should be properly, which is
right.
the job of the landowners, the job of the renters,
Right.
not the rentees. And so in Caprini Greens, towards the end of it, they had like snipers inside the building, that the gang snipers, and what they had was like on the very top floors, they would have different apartments and they were like all burnt out and stuff, and they would actually break holes in the walls so they could go from apartment to apartment to get different angles and shots
Wow.
from the Caprini. And it was like a huge, and so that's where like a lot of the imagery and dread and a lot of stuff they come up with, it comes from there. And Caprini Greens, you can actually see it in the movie Candyman. The first Candyman takes place in Caprini Greens.
Wow. I remember that film.
Yes.
It's another because of Judge Dredd, especially the new incarnation, you obviously had that a whole time lapsing drug element in it. I heard an interesting concept quite a while back, and it kind of relates to a book which it's also made into a film, but it's not a very good film. And the book is called A Brave New World, and they have this sort of ultimate drug called Soma.
Oh my. Oh, Brave New World's my favorite. I wish more people would use Brave New Worldian to describe our world than Orwellian. Because
Yeah.
when you say Orwellian, you're basically saying Stalinist with cameras.
Mm.
When I see it, but Brave New World actually had a lot of really interesting kind of predictions in it. The way that the rich had completely stratified the society
Mm.
to where the caste system had become completely rigid, which we're kind of approaching now in America, and I don't know how it is over in Europe, but the income inequality is getting really bad here.
Oh yeah.
There was that. I believe they had what was it? The drug Soma, like you talked about, the kind of the eraser of culture for one kind of just kind of amalgamated, sterilized thing, which is kind of what you're seeing today.
But it's something to explore because as the world becomes more and more sort of automated, let's say that it's very realistic to think of a world where robots do all the work in very brutal sorry, in very brutal terms, robots do all the work and we have all the time in the world on our hands. I don't think, well, at least a lot of people think that we don't have the emotional capabilities of having that much free time. Like we don't have enough emotions to actually deal with so much time on our hands. We need to have projects and things to do. So, a lot of writers will solve this issue by introducing this sort of entertaining drug to us. Or I've read articles when it came to artificial intelligence and especially altering the human brain to say, like, let's put a filter in the human brain so we can actually augment the emotional capabilities of a person so that they can deal with the fact that they have all the time in the world on their hands and nothing to do.
Yeah, but I mean, people have. What I'm saying is, I wonder is the constant prevalence of drugs in sci-fi, is that more a reflection of the fact that we have no idea what to do with our time, or is it more a reflection of the fact that humans are always looking for ways to alter our consciousness?
Well, that's a
And in that sense, drugs is the one thing that will be constant. No matter how far you get into the future, people will always want to get high.
Well, I mean, obviously that's a concept that was very much explored by Terence McKenna, for instance, in this book called Food of the Gods, where he actually sort of tries to find a correlation between mushrooms growing and, the Cro-Magnon people eating the mushrooms and developing language,
Yes, I remember. Yes, Joe Rogan talked about that book. It was something about how his theory was that early primates, they came down from the trees,
Mm-hmm.
and they started eating magic mushrooms because it was a new food source and it would cause vivid hallucinations, and that actually increased the size of the brain computing powers, which over time allowed them to evolve into kind of the early humans.
Right. That's pretty much the gist of it, yeah.
Yes, I know of that theory. I like it.
I've always very much liked that as a theory. I mean, I find it difficult to find any kind of, solid base for it, especially coming from a man like Terence McKenna, who wrote all that stuff while he was incredibly high as well. So,
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a very interesting concept, and it's definitely present in a lot of films, especially.
Well, and in a lot of people's lives. I mean, if you look in a lot of famous people, a lot of them have drawn major inspiration from big kind of trippy moments in their life when they took kind of hallucinogenic drugs.
Right.
And that's always been one of the benefits of hallucinogenic drugs, is that it has that potential to kind of to just radically change the way you view stuff.
Right. I'm trying to think of another good movie drug. But some of them are just flat out
we're gonna do favorite movie drugs.
Favorite movie drugs.
Oh man, favorite movie drugs. Well, Space Coke from Cheech and Chong's next movie. This is Space Coke, man.
I think you just won it.
Yeah, that's a good space drug.
That is
it's so good it actually shoots you up into space.
Well, I mean, it's just so funny how even in especially in modern, in films from right now, I can think of Limitless and Lucy, which is basically the same film if you add it all up. Only Lucy.
Well, and the funny thing is, both of them are based on a faulty premise, because we do use 100% of our brains. So
that as well, that is that sort of that ultimate fact that everybody believes and has never been true. But it's so funny to me how it is all about the person becoming something more instead of just relaxing. Because in Cheech and Chong, it's really about the stoner,
Yeah.
Whereas now it's like, oh, I'm taking a drug, but actually it makes me better than any other human.
And that brings us to an interesting talking point, because again, since sci-fi reflects life, we have seen the growing prevalence of a lot of drugs that that deal specifically with that, of trying to, pep you up and make you more awake so you can get more done, like Adderall in colleges, or meth, or, drugs like that are designed to keep you up and active and make you more productive.
Right.
And do you think what do you think that means about society at the moment? Are we racing to a point where you have to become more and more productive just to compete now, due to the nature of the economy, or?
Oh, well, I don't even necessarily think. Well, I'm gonna have to take a step back before I say something, but I think that the nature of economy is a big part of it. I have so little of a clue of that part that I choose to ignore that. And I think more about the devices that are given into our hands, like that are actually continuously buzzing for us with new things to do. For instance, I made a big mistake in my last project as a programmer, the one I'm working on right now, of giving a couple of users my personal email address. So, like, because they are very good at finding certain bugs. Now, I'm like in the weekends, in the middle of the night, my laptop tells me that there's emails waiting for me, and somehow I cannot resist the temptation of getting up and looking at it. So I think that's a big part of like the push for productivity as well. And
so kind of the constant connectivity makes it to where we always feel like we have to be busy, because we simply can't shut off as easily as it was back in the day.
No, absolutely, and I think drugs, whether legal or illegal, help us definitely cope with that. I mean, as I told you before, I've worked in the States for a while, and you guys are a lot happier with the prescription path than other
God,
countries.
yeah. Oh, prescriptions are so big. Well, and I think that's also a function of the drug war.
Yeah. Oh,
Because
absolutely.
we had a lot of propaganda pushed on us that said certain things were always bad no matter what, that was false. And so now people think, oh, well, a doctor's giving this to me, so it's not that bad. Even though, in the case of some prescription drugs, even compared to marijuana, they're like far more dangerous.
Well, I mean, this is you mentioned an interesting one. You just sort of glanced over Adderall. For me, that's a very interesting one because in the programmer scene, the one that I saw in the States in Los Angeles, Adderall was one of the main things that was going around saying like this will make you program for 12 hours and you won't stop anymore, and that was 100% true. But after the third day awake, you're not productive anymore. Like,
yeah.
And then you look at the label, and the label doesn't say Adderall. The label says amphetamines, and that sounds very, sort of medicine-y to a lot of people. So it probably is fine, but that's just speed.
Yeah.
So like to me, it's very strange that especially you guys in the States are already so far that you prescribe that stuff to kids. Because it happens to also sometimes focuses an ADHD person.
Yeah.
But only for so
that
long.
also deals with that also touches into the area of corruption in politics, because the pharmaceutical companies in America have a lot of control over regulators,
right?
And that prevents them, that allows them to run hog wild with a lot of stuff. And they also have a lot of shady business practices too, with regards to getting doctors to push drugs on patients in exchange for like cruises and rock concerts and stuff. John Oliver did a story about that part in particular on Last Week Tonight. He did that a few months ago.
Okay.
If you wanted to catch up with that, but yeah, so we've got a whole bunch of problems that stem from like 9 or 10 different things in America. It's all a mess right now.
But I think we are definitely primed to sort of accept these situations, also coming from films, because films really they put this nice little sugar coating over drug usage when it comes to on screen, but off screen as well. Because one of the greatest stories I hear is like what's his name, Robert Downey Jr. He used to be a huge addict. Right, and he overcame that, and he became this symbol in Iron Man, for instance. And it's almost like this symbol of, he overcame this huge obstacle of drug addiction. But the difference between his experience and the experience of a normal person is that he has the money of doing, the cold turkey process properly in a nice, 5-star resort.
Yeah,
Whereas, people that hear that story, they have to go through it in their little, flat.
yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, and also the fact that it's illegal is such a huge problem because you also run the risk of, instead of getting help in the form of rehabilitation so you can overcome that addiction, you're instead getting a criminal record and experience with convicted, experienced criminals on how to do your addiction better.
Right.
So you get on the drug, you get training in your bad habit, and you get a record that prevents you from getting anything else but going back to that bad habit to make money.
Right.
So, a very vicious cycle we've created.
I mean, I guess one of the biggest, thinking about it now, one of the most, I guess it's both subtle and not so subtle influences of drugs in cinema is the Philip K. Dick adaptations. And in particular, I'd like to look at the one that looked like a cartoon. It's actually my favorite book, and Scanner Darkly.
Oh, that one got made into a movie with Keanu Reeves, didn't it?
It did, yeah, and it isn't half bad, to be honest. I was a bit weirded out with the cartoon filter that they put on top of it.
Yeah.
But it's actually a reasonable representation of the book, and I find it very interesting to see the way that they deal with the very negative side of drug addiction in that film.
Yeah. That would be interesting to see. I don't know. I see a lot of Hollywood films deal with the negative side of drug addiction.
Um,
I mean, you recently had The Fighter win a whole bunch of Oscars, and that was all about drug addiction.
I haven't seen that film yet.
Aspects of it.
I see
Breaking Bad was like the biggest show in America for a while,
Right.
and it deals all about kind of the real dark side of drug dealing. And it actually, like, and that's funny because you had Weeds, which was before that, which is a much more, which was essentially kind of the same story. You know, a normal kind of family man, or in this case woman, gets driven to a desperate situation and has to sell drugs, but it's so much more lighthearted.
Right.
And you just saw like that show just like disappear, and Breaking Bad just took off. So
see, the thing with Breaking Bad is I still felt like, I know that it's not true, but my feeling of it was, my experience was that it was still glorifying the drug idea on the screen. And I think a lot of that had to do with the Jesse Pinkman character, because he was written in a very sort of cool way.
yeah, but his life was miserable, man.
That is true.
He was never once happy in that season, and all of the most of the bad shit happened to him.
Right. See, and still, for some reason, my recollection of it is still like this glorified, cool character that yells bitch all the time and screams about magnets and science. You know, like, that's what stuck with me.
No, like the one thing that stuck with me was a big spoiler from like season 2 or 3. So I don't think I want to talk about it and piss everybody off. But it was a big story changing moment. It was a big moment in the story where I felt like there was an actual shift in the tone, because the first season felt kind of lighthearted, where it was like, oh, I'm doing these drugs, but I'm so wacky because I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm like a fish out of water, but I have these chemistry skills, so at the end of every episode, I'll come up with some cool bit of chemistry that'll get me out of it. And then the second season got a little bit darker, and then the third season was where, at this point in the story that I'm talking about, there was this change, and you saw it. There was like a shift in the tone of the character. It was like, okay, now this guy is a really evil person now. He is not the same guy that we started with.
I know exactly which moment you're talking about, and I do appreciate that. I think the big difference between Breaking Bad and a film like Scanner Darkly is Scanner Darkly dealt with the mental state of this this particular drug that they call substance D, which, if you wanted to put it in chemical terms, I believe you'd be like, it would be a mix between amphetamines and DMT, so a very powerful tryptamine versus a very powerful upper, combined together. And what this guy was going through was this split from the left to the right brain. So he was losing all communications between the two hemispheres, which was creating this mental state that, to me, sounds 10 times more scarier than all of Breaking Bad combined. Like, I would rather be Jesse Pinkman in Breaking Bad than I would want to be Bob Archer in A Scanner Darkly, mainly because I'm so scared of that mental collapse that he is going through.
Mm. Interesting. Makes me think about other interesting movies that deal with memory and the brain.
Right.
A really good kind of independent one was, I believe it was called Brain Dead.
Right.
With Bill Pullman. Is a really kind of like low budget movie. I don't think anybody's heard of it, but it was from 1990, and it is trippy as all crazy. He gets into like a car accident at the beginning of the movie, and it does something weird to his brain, like screws up his head, and it just like the film just spirals into complete madness.
Right. I like Bill Pullman a lot.
I do too. He's a great actor.
Mm. I saw some really interesting interviews with him in a David Lynch documentary.
Mm.
He's a very, very interesting character. I'm just trying to find this film now.
Yeah, you might have to space out Brain and Dead, because there's another Brain Dead which I know is Dead Alive.
Right.
Which is the Peter Jackson zombie movie.
Right.
It also goes by Brain Dead, and so it'll usually pull that up on accident when you search this movie.
That was a weird film as well.
Oh, that film was great, though.
I mean, Peter Jackson is such a strange
I wish he
career.
would go back and do more films like that. I'm getting tired of the Lord of the Rings stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Like, the Lord of the Rings, like, sort of classically set by Kevin Smith to be just people walking.
Oh, I love that, man.
Yeah, that was a great analysis.
That was such a good joke, man. Because I felt that same way. I remember getting the first movie on DVD, and this is before I had read the books, because I actually like the books now. I read them, but I remember getting the first DVD, sitting down. You're sitting through like 3 hours of this adventure, and it's like, okay, they're pretty good. You get to the end of it, and they're looking at the volcano. Boom! See you in 2 years when we release the next one. I'm like, man, I am not seeing another one of these. I am not seeing them in protest, man. That's just, that's wrong.
Now that's an interesting question. Are you really the kind of person who would not see a film out of protest? Like, did you not go and see The Hobbit, for instance?
I haven't seen The Hobbit or the other two Lord of the Rings, except when people put it on in the background.
Right. See, because I'm that kind of idiot that still goes to the next Transformer film, because, I once grew up with a cartoon series.
No, I gave up on the Transformers. I don't watch any of those. I don't think I've seen any of them except for maybe like one.
I have to say, I can't remember now who did the video, but there is an amazing analysis. Actually, it's Cracked.com. Cracked recently did an analysis of
Michael Bay?
Of Michael Bay, and it is both very confronting and incredibly funny.
Yes, no, if you have the Cracked.com app, where they actually have articles, they had an article that was similar to that like a little while ago.
Right.
And I think there was another YouTube on video that kind of talked about the same thing, that Michael Bay is actually a pretty smart filmmaker.
Yeah, the video is actually called the video is actually called Why Michael Bay Might Secretly Be a Genius. And
yeah, and that's the thing. He has been admitted into the Criterion Collection.
Yeah, two times, I think.
Yep.
But then again, like, he studied on some school where one of his teachers was the owner of the Criterion Collection, or he's one of the curators. And they all really liked him over there somehow. But there's something interestingly, like, I'll sort of, the biggest sort of gist of it all, of that video from Crack, was that, you know, is it that Michael Bay is, you know, making these films just to make lots of money, or is it that he's making these films and holding up a mirror to society saying like, oh, do you want to watch this? Do you want this? Yes? Okay. I'll make more and more, and I'll kick that horse to see how far are you guys are willing to go. How much money are you willing to spend on absolute shit?
I'll tell you what. If it is one giant prank, and at like the very end of his career, he does some kind of movie that's basically a gotcha where he explains the entire ruse and how he did it, he would have to get some kind of award. He would definitely go up there as one of the greatest.
Well, I mean,
be able to punk society for that long.
If he were to explain himself, I would be very, very disappointed with him. Now, if he would
have to make a good movie is what he'd have to do.
Absolutely.
He would have to make an excellent movie that at the same time, while being excellent, also explains how he's been fucking us for like the past 20 years.
Absolutely. It doesn't just have to be excellent. It has to be literally one of the best films ever made. Like,
it would have to be like a movie. It would have to be like super autobiographical and like black and white, and he would be like a main character, and it would go through like this. It would be like the new 8.5, like the postmodern 8.5. And
oh my god! Can you imagine? Like
I can. I can picture the whole movie now.
Michael Bay's 8.5. We'll call it like 9.
It'll be 9 3/4. And I can just like, cause you know how he does that shot where he's got like everything moving. I can imagine doing that while he's writing his paychecks. You know, just like.
My God! Like, well, I'm seriously hoping for that future where we see Michael Bay's mockumentary, Fellini style, you know, self-directing thing.
Oh, that would be the best. Oh, yeah, that would be the best and the worst.
Well, I'm thinking of basically leaving it here, because I don't think we're going to talk Michael Bay's 8.5. So.
Oh, I would love to storyboard the whole thing now. Now's a good stopping point. We've kind of been all over the sci-fi realm.
Right.
So,
I mean, we'll have a sort of a get together and see what we are going to discuss next.
Oh yeah, but that'll be after we go off live.
So I'd like to thank everybody who was watching for watching.
Wait, and before we go, we got to get all the promos out.
Oh, get your promos out. Okay,
and don't forget to get yours as well. So Evil Antonio on Twitter, Facebook.com/Evil Antonio, I believe. It should pull up the YouTube channel, YouTube.com/user/What Sounds Best, or if you search Evil Antonio Reviews, that should pull me up. Oh, Facebook.com/The Evil Antonio.
The Evil Antonio.
Yeah, I couldn't get regular Evil Antonio. And then your stuff?
So for us, just come visit us at indieboogie.com. It's a free website for independent filmmakers. We help you promote all your stuff, and it's a completely free resource. You can connect with filmmakers from all over the world, and if you submit your film to our website, it will be automatically tweeted out over our social networks, Facebook, everywhere. And you can follow us at Boogie Ltd or at Parting Badgers, and that's everything, I think.
Yep, sounds good. See you later.
Well, we'll see everybody later, and thank you for watching, and thank you, Evil, for coming.
No problem.
Cool. Let me close the screen now.